Welcome to episode 11. I'm Danielle Stiles.
And I'm Chasey Bardach.
Today we are with Rebecca Fleetwood Hession. Now, if you don't know who Rebecca is, well, you've probably not been paying attention to social media, because in the women entrepreneur space, she is everywhere. And we are here today to dive into not only your company, wethrive.live, but all the things that you're doing, including the Badass Women's podcast and some events that you've got on the calendar coming up here in 2020. So before we get started, let's maybe dive into some background about you, Rebecca. Talk to us a little bit about all the things that you're doing and how you've kind of arrived in a place that you're able to do all the things.
Gosh, background, how far do we want to go? When I was 16, So I started my business because of a need that I had. I spent a few decades in corporate America. I was with the Franklin Covey organization and knew I wanted to create my own thing. I just didn't know really when and what that was going to be. And when I did launch my business, the day I gave notice at my company, I gave a 6-month notice. Very generous, I might add.
That is.
And
Yeah, that's huge.
I had a pretty significant book of business that needed to be dealt with. So I gave a 6-month notice and I hung up the phone that day and I thought, I'm really excited and entrepreneur, alone. And you just quit the job where all of your friends work. So my closest friends were all over the world connected to my work. I didn't really have business women or men kind of friends down the street or in my community because I'd been traveling for decades for this job. And it was this realization of, oh my gosh, this is gonna suck. I'm gonna be by myself. I gotta go find some friends. So my very first thought as an entrepreneur was, I need new friends. And so I thought I can either bitch about it or I can go do something about it. So I spent the next couple of months looking around and looking for like-minded entrepreneurs and professionals that were in my community that I could go to the local coffee shop and I could meet with and have real conversations with. So that's really how the biggest part of my business was born. And so I found these 6 women plus myself, and I said, let's just get together once a month. We'll meet at Cafe Patachou down the street from where I live and talk about our businesses. And they all said, all right. And some of them I knew and some of them I didn't. And the day before our first meeting, I had this panic. I had this 7th grade girl. My mom had told me I could have the party, but what if nobody showed up?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you never lose that kind of fear of this, what does this connection really mean? And I changed clothes 4 times before the meeting and did all the things. And we got there, and within an hour, it was this magical recognition that we didn't know how much we all needed what we had just created until we had it. And now we've been together for over 2 years, and there's no way that I would give up any of these relationships ever in my entire life. And I flippantly called us the Badass Women's Council because badass is a word that I've used for long before Jen wrote the book. Not bitter about that. Yeah, I'm bitter about that. And so it's a thing, right? And so we're enjoying the benefits of it. We're really enjoying the benefits of connection. And then people started saying, how can I get in?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's a thing. I need to think about that. So then I started my podcast, the Badass Women's Council, and then I started an online community so other people can meet their people.
So let's talk about your podcast for a minute. What, if people haven't listened, what can you expect to find as part of your podcast? What's your audience? What are your topics? All the things.
I love my podcast. So high achieving women is my target audience. And I define high achieving as a woman that would choose to work whether she needed to for the money or not. So her hard wiring is about business and career, whatever that looks like for her, but it's something that she loves and enjoys. She doesn't just do it for the money, but I do like to make money. There's no shame in the money game.
No.
So that's the audience, and so interviews really are just tied to those types of topics. I have 2 tenets for each of the episodes, which is reflection and connection. So reflection, oftentimes what we talk about is what I refer to as the little bitch in our head. You know, that voice that you have that says you're not enough, you probably shouldn't do that, who do you think you are, all those things. She thinks she's keeping us safe. It's part of our hard wiring, but my instruction is always, we're going to put her in the passenger seat with a seatbelt and a snack. She's always going to be with us, but she doesn't get to drive, right? Yeah. So to think,
and you got to name her.
Yeah, you have to name her, because when you name her, then you can treat her kindly, or you can vilify her, right? So she'll die with us. Like, she gets buried with us. We're never going to get rid of her. So we have to name her and deal with her as a part of our life, but not let her run our life.
She's who made you change clothes 4 times.
Yes, absolutely.
So what's her name?
I just call her the little bitch.
The little
LB.
bitch.
Yes, I love it. It's so funny that you mentioned this. We literally just sat, where were we when we heard this conversation? We were somewhere together recently, and they were talking about naming your person, right? Your little bitch.
Yeah.
And they're like, if you don't put a finger on it, give them a name, and have something to be like, no, this is not your moment. You need to be quiet. It will rule your subconscious. That becomes your thought.
Absolutely. Words have power.
Okay, so the Badass Women's Council podcast is intended for women all over the country, here local to Indy. Talk to us a little bit about...
All over the country. So I interview people outside of our local community. Because of my work with Franklin Covey, I have relationships all over the world. So we try to branch out.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a podcast, obviously.
And interestingly, like 47% of my listeners are men.
What?
So we don't talk about weird women kind of things. Like, there's no tampon commercials or anything weird like that. It's not, but the topics are pretty universal.
That is shocking, especially with the title of your podcast. You would assume that it would be dominantly women.
Who doesn't love a badass woman? Come on.
That's true.
Maybe they're looking for other kind of networking within that.
I'm single, so I don't know.
There you go.
You need to meet Rachel. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So I want to dive a little bit further into this community of conversation, because I think that, obviously it's why we exist to serve, is we saw a significant need here in the city of Indianapolis to get these high-achieving women together and create an opportunity for them to network, because that's how we've come to be, even, is the power of community and collaboration, and finding a space where there's a quote that I'm obsessed with, and it's not who you know, it's who you know that knows what you do and why you do it.
Oh.
Right? So it's more than just, what is your title, what is your business, who are your customers, but more of the story of your mission and your business purpose, if you will. And I know that you've got a lot to say about that. So I'd love if you could just dive into that for a moment with us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many things. One is isolation and loneliness is number 3 underneath obesity and smoking for health-related issues. So before we even go to the place that we're ultimately going to go, let's just sit in that for a minute, right? And as an entrepreneur, what I experienced even before I even started the journey is recognizing that you have to have community in order to have any sense of well-being. And when you don't have it, you suffer health challenges, right?
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs especially need to make sure that they understand that building community isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. Because when that little bitch in your head starts telling you all the things you're not, you better have some people that you can sit down with, heartbeat to heartbeat, eyeball to eyeball, and have coffee and say, you got this. It's going to be okay, and keep moving you forward. So from a community perspective, it's health, it's science, it's fundamental. But then to answer your other question about the story, it's really interesting, and I teach my clients this, and it's counterintuitive. So when someone asks you what you do, rather than respond with what your business is, you should respond with what your business does and who it serves. So for an example, if I would introduce myself as an executive coach, what people naturally do is think of all the other executive coaches that they know and want to introduce me to them. Well, I love a good, meet another coach, but that's not going to further my business, really. We're just going to have a great conversation about coaching. So instead, when I introduce myself, I should say, instead of I'm an executive coach, I work with high-achieving women that are, and then describe who my audience is and how I help them. Because when people receive that information into their brains, they naturally connect with who that you serve, not what that you do.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of my clients just started a commercial real estate business. And Melissa Blackwell, by the way, if you need some commercial real estate. And we were having this conversation, and I said, don't ever introduce yourself as a commercial real estate agent. You want to say, hi, my name is Melissa Blackwell, and I love working with manufacturers and small business who are looking for new properties so that they can make their dreams come true. Then when somebody hears that, they go, oh my gosh, my neighbor is starting a business and looking for a building, versus thinking about, oh, I know a commercial real estate person.
It's really funny you say that, because we so often try to define our titles based on a consumer comprehension, right? So I might say, I do social media education, and they'll be like, oh, I need social media education. Great. Are you my target audience for that conversation, right? Likely not, because I do very niche social media coaching. So instead, you could say something like, I help realtors and affiliates to the housing industry better manage their social platforms. Great. Now you know exactly who it is and who I'm serving, instead of just going down this rabbit hole of having a conversation about social media or something that's like a total sideline conversation. But as somebody who's creating that, like that messaging, our elevator pitch, as we so often call it, I think we so often are trying to use words that we know are going to immediately be able to be processed into that referral space, because it's the point, right? It's not who you know, it's who you know that knows what you do. I've never thought of it that way, though.
It's a thing.
It's so good.
And being a photographer, I do not like saying I'm a photographer, because how many people are photographers? So if I'm saying I specialize in creating social media content that serves the female entrepreneur, well, hey, I know all these women.
Now people go, oh, I know a female entrepreneur, and that's who you want to talk to.
Brilliant.
Versus,
I love that.
I know 5 photographers. You're like, great. That's
Yeah,
exactly
don't
what
we
I do.
all?
Bring my competition right to my face,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're kind of helping women walk through this process?
So, say more about your question.
So if you are helping women kind of bridge this gap, right, between where they are today in their business, if they're going to come and tune into your podcast or join your communities, what are they going to learn? What are they coming out on the other side?
So I start the conversation with the difference between striving and thriving. Because as working women, you get to that point where you've been striving to get to the next thing, achieve the next goal, do all the things. And the word strive comes from the word strife, which means battle and conflict. And doesn't your life feel like a battle sometimes, like full of conflict? And thriving is different. Thriving is to grow, prosper, and flourish. So we still want to grow, still want to prosper, all the things, but it's about creating the right conditions for that growth. And it's a different mindset, it's a different set of practices. And under that, there are 3 things that I work with my clients with: story, money, and rhythm. Story is a lot of the personal brand things that you were talking about earlier. And it's also about your own personal story. What are your hardwired, unique gifts and talents? What did you come to this earth with that you should be using for good, right? So getting really clear on that. And what's really interesting, especially with high achieving women, when we first sit down, I'll say, okay, let's make a list. Let's inventory your unique gifts and talents. And they do this. I'm a good mom. I'm like, okay, you should keep doing that, but that's a role that you play. What else you got? Well, I'm a good photographer. Okay, that's another role that you play. You should keep doing that. And we have a really hard time just recognizing what we're good at. Right? And so getting that list down to be able to say, these are the things that when you go be a great photographer, when you go do your business, make sure that you're using your unique gifts and talents to do that. And it's fascinating when people start to see that list. They're like, this is why my job isn't satisfying anymore, because I've stopped doing those things. And then we can kind of redirect the role back into why they originally started doing it and what really lights them up. And then also look at the story of the business, some of the things we just talked about, how you communicate it. So story has a lot of dynamics to it. But money is separate, because money is fuel for your story. Money is neutral. It's a neutral commodity. You can take the same amount of money and start a strip club or a nonprofit, right?
Yes.
So money has value based on the story that you attach to it. So if we start a business just for the money, it's not going to have longevity. It's not going to light us up long term. But if we start a business based on our unique wiring and our unique gifts and talents, and then look at how we can make money doing those things, that's the right combination. So rhythm is about how you reconnect those things back into not only the flow that you need to have the conversations we just talked about, but also making sure that the business doesn't become your life, right? So we can get so excited about our businesses as entrepreneurs that we isolate ourselves down to that's all we think about and that's all we do, which makes us not very interesting people.
Can you give us an example of one of those items, right? So you use the example of I'm a photographer, I take great pictures, but that's not an example of what you're good at. What would be an example of something that you're good at?
So let's, I'm going to make something up that I think will tie to photography. So I have experience with a photographer in a past life. She loved the people aspect of it. Like when you saw her pictures, she could bring out the best of her subjects. She specialized in family and children and loved that aspect of it. She hated the technical aspect of it, the editing and all the things that are necessary, right? So her unique gift and talent was the connection. So you saw that in her pictures. You could just see how she brought that out. Now, I've known other photographers that loved the technical aspect of it, right? So they're doing things that are less about the people side of things and more about the landscapes or the city buildings or something where they could technically create some kind of visual image that makes them feel something.
Yeah.
Those are both photographers, but those are very different types of photographers, right?
Yeah.
And if you were to swap either one of them into the other's role, they would not enjoy it, right? So you need to know what it is that gets you lit up about what you're doing and make sure that you build the business around those gifts and talents.
I love that. You talked a little bit about money, and I want to sink into that for a second because I think there are we have done an episode about knowing your value, and especially in the creative entrepreneurial space, I feel like they are probably the most guilty of undervaluing themselves. There's this theme that it's like been swirling around us as we've been talking about the Indie Social is about you shouldn't get paid based on how long it took you to do it. You should get paid based on your experience that allowed you then take what used to be a 10-hour process and do it in an hour. I want to talk about that for a minute because I think women specifically have this really big roadblock when it comes to being able to put value on themselves and stand firm in that value.
Amen. We have this rule in our circle. We say fear plus 10%. Whatever you're afraid to charge, 10% more, you're almost probably at your market value.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is true. We have this industrial age perspective about business, which is about sweat equity. You know, how hard did I work? How many hours did it take? And all of this comes out of the industrial age model. It's the factory model.
Yeah.
And it is not at all applicable to most of the stuff that we do. So I'm an executive coach, I'm a keynote speaker, I'm a business consultant. I can walk in, have a meeting for an hour with a business owner, and probably give them significant value. It's not about the hour, it's the 30 years of business experience and things that I've gleaned that I've now curated and distilled into an hour-long conversation for that business owner to have the value of that from me. If you said, oh, I was only there an hour, so,
$100 will do?
no.
Right. But I think that that's definitely the model, even as consumers, that we approach things. And I think that that's as much of a women in business issue as it is how are we as consumers approaching the brands that we choose to do business with. Like why would I pay $6 or $4 for a cup of coffee versus, well, I'll just brew it at home with Folgers for $1.29 a cup. Your experience, your community, what are you getting for your $1.29 cup at home by yourself versus going out and, supporting somebody's business or valuing the work that it took to create what they're creating for you. But I think that it's just this weird dynamic with money, especially when we talk about events and when we're going to pay for mentorship or coaching. Money always becomes a really big barrier to entry. Do you find that to be the case for you?
Yeah, and it is interesting when you talk about events and coaching and things of that nature, which is another reason it's really important for you to be able to communicate your business based on the value that you provide, not the hours that you work, right? But it's also indicative of if you're not willing to invest in yourself, then do you really value yourself enough to, like, you should want to go get what you need to be really great at your whatever your business is. And if you don't value that to go out and develop yourself, to me that's the first place as an entrepreneur I think that you should be concerned about. Is if you're not willing to invest in the thing that's supposed to be growing your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hurdle that I think people need to reevaluate big time.
Are you helping people bridge that gap?
Yeah, and it's there's always a personal money story. So money is the second part of my process. And before we even talk about the money-making model of the business, which is significant, I have people journal out, what's your personal money story? How were you raised thinking and talking about money? How do you view money? And it's very interesting that people have a lot of aha moments there that manifest into their business. So one of the ones that came up for a client recently was, I believe that people who have made a lot of money are probably jerks, because I grew up in a family where that's the way we talked about people with a lot of money. None of my she said, none of my family had money, and so when you talked about people that did make a lot of money, it was with a very negative connotation. She said, now that I've become successful, I have this weird dynamic about going home because I'm successful. I do make a lot of money now. Wondering, do I still fit in? And I wonder if they talk bad about me when I leave because they know that I'm now making a lot of money because I rolled up in a nice car, right? Yeah. So your personal money story really does drive some weird business undercurrents that I like to bring to the surface so we can deal with those, because then we can look at your money-making model of your business more holistically. Yeah.
That's big. I think people's, it's so funny running into your 30s, as I just joined, right? You do the eye roll about, okay, getting older, what does that mean? What does that look like for me in my business as well as personal life? And then to be faced with so many things that are affecting you in business and in your adult life that happened in childhood is like shocking almost. Like, what is this thing that's carrying around? But it all stems from those earliest memories of that experience, what that should look like.
And self-awareness is the superpower of all business, whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or whether you're running your own shop. Your mindset and your self-awareness is fundamentally the cornerstone of your success. So just getting really clear on your authentic self is super important.
So your program helps women do this. Yeah. Okay, so how can we join? What does it look like?
So the best way, the easiest point of entry would be to listen to the podcast. Make sure that I'm your jam, right? So I'm not everybody's cup of tea. That's fine. Listen to the podcast. If it resonates, then jump into the online community, which is badasswomen'scouncil.community. And there, it's a free resource, and there's also some paid content. So what I love about the space that I've created is the algorithms connect you based on geography and interest. So as you come into the community and you start commenting and participating, it will notice that and say, oh, you're in Indianapolis and you're interested in entrepreneurial topics. And you'll be able to log in and look at the other people in Indianapolis who are interested in entrepreneurial topics. So that's an opportunity to say, hey, would you like to have coffee? Would you like to get together? Because I care about three things. I want to ban burnout, build community, and boost business. So it's a great opportunity to do all three by meeting like-minded people right here in the Indianapolis area.
That's amazing. So your podcast and your audience is international, not just here in the U.S., but you are still creating those opportunities to have local meetups. So do you have any local meetups planned?
So the 2020 calendar is being built, and if you go into the badasswomen'scouncil.community, that's where you can see all the things that are happening there. We do have an event coming up on March the 5th called Stand Tall in Your Story, which is a group of women that I've been through a 7-month experience with called Rise and Thrive, and they have been participants in this experience, and they will be the presenters of this event. So they'll stand on stage at the Cabaret Theater in Indianapolis and tell their story. And it's also a great opportunity to network. So not only will they be on stage telling the story, but there'll be great opportunity to have conversations at the tables with other people, other women that are there, and really get to know more people that are interested in the same things that you are.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So at the launch of this podcast, that's just like a few weeks away. Is there tickets?
There will be tickets, yes. And go to the badasswomen'scouncil.community, because that's where you'll find all the things.
Okay, great.
All the things.
So they can check out tickets, pick up an opportunity to communicate or to network with your community there. Beyond that, do you have a social platform, any other online forums that people can kind of get in touch with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. So our Instagram is Badass Women's Council as well. And then my LinkedIn is Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, and I do a lot of event announcements there as well. Those are the two main platforms that I use.
I'm going to take a minute and ask you, what are your thoughts on LinkedIn lately? Are you finding a lot of business productivity happening in the LinkedIn space?
I love LinkedIn. I know some people have some weird perspectives about it. There's a couple of things I love about LinkedIn, and I've been very careful to curate the experience I want out of LinkedIn based on who I follow and how I connect, right? It's very intentional. I think if you just jumped into LinkedIn and just were like, oh, this place is boring, it could be that. But I've been intentional about making sure it's not. So one of the things I love about LinkedIn is I have some people there that I've connected with that are doing some amazing things with education and youth. So I love some of the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds that are producing really interesting business content on LinkedIn and how that's interfacing with some of the other business people there. I just think it's fascinating what's happening and what the opportunities are for young entrepreneurs and the things that they're doing. I don't know.
Are you finding that it's more personal behind the scenes business, or when we talked to, whom was it in the podcast? Was it Tag Studio?
Mm-hmm.
She was saying that Instagram she kept more business, more squared out, and then LinkedIn was more kind of behind the scenes business. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so I think really what you're trying to get at is the point of business versus professional, right? People always have this balance of we feel like two people, right? We have our business life and our personal life, but when we show up in social platforms, a big component of it is what are we showing? What lane are we staying in that platform? I think historically speaking, LinkedIn tried to really go and put the stake in the ground and say we're all business all the time. So it was a very B2B sort of space. And then they started opening up, they're like, well, maybe we can't survive on B2B exclusively. It has to be more B2C or even C2C, which obviously is Facebook, right? Facebook is C2C, but it's ad spend space, right? So it's C2C for consumers, but it's funded by the businesses who would love to be in front of those consumers. What are you finding to be the case on LinkedIn?
I have this bias and this perspective that we shouldn't see ourselves as two people. You are one life, one story, right? And part of your story is business and part of it is personal, but it should really be one life. And so the people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn are very vulnerable and authentic about their lives and their business as one person, and maybe that's why I enjoy it so much. Is that it is? I scroll past the the people,
show.
The people that the only thing they ever post is an event that they are pimping out for their corporation.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing they ever post. I'm like, oh, for the love of God. Like, who are you? What's I'm not going to come to your event. I don't even know who you are, right? So I've curated a group of people that are their full selves when they show up and they're talking about their life and their business. I mean, they're not posting inappropriate things. LinkedIn should be, in my opinion, business related. But be authentic about who you are, about your business there.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think there's so many people who, especially when they start new ventures, they're like whittling it behind the scenes, and then they show up one day and they're like, boom, here it is. Everybody should love it. Don't you love my thing? I've been working on it for a year. And everybody's like, what is this? I don't understand it. Let me process this. Let me take it in.
Yeah.
Versus, well, I'll use our podcast for an example. You know, we started promotions for this podcast back in October. We didn't even launch our first episode until December 4th. And that preview time was like literally the story, the behind the scenes, the like, what does it look like, a day in the life experience, which for those who followed us, I mean, when we launched, we were at almost 500 followers on our Instagram page. which was shocking. Our goal was like, if we just get 100 people together.
Yeah, we were so happy to just think we would be at 100 by the time we launched.
But then that allowed us to kind of do that preview story before we got to the point of like, you actually have an episode out. Now I get it. Now I'm meeting these women. Now I know who the indie social actually is. But I think so often you're right. Women specifically, but I think everybody in general is constantly busy putting on these hats or trying to like put things in lanes, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, it just doesn't work. And maybe it's because I'm 53 and I just don't care anymore. I do care. I say I don't care. I care about putting out quality content, but I'm not as concerned about making sure it all looks good. So if you follow Badass Women's Council on Instagram, my stories are pretty authentic. I'll tell the good, the bad, and the ugly, and sometimes I show up looking a little rough. But
with 100 Post-it notes behind you at your desk.
Yes, that's how I write. I'm writing a book. That's how I write my book. Is anytime I have thought, I categorize in big Post-it notes on the walls of my office. So if I need to move things around, I don't have to move them around in a file on my computer, which is cumbersome. I just visually move them around, and I stand back and stare at it and go, oh yeah, that does go before that. And then that story can go here. And then once it's all laid out, then I put the words together in a document.
The creative process is never pretty, is it? No.
It's messy.
Super messy. That's part of the fun.
Okay, so we've got a couple of ways to connect to you. Obviously the podcast, then you have this online academy. Talk to me about your online course.
So there'll be a couple of different options when you come into the community. So there's always the free aspect, just get to know people, and I post some content there. There'll be a monthly subscription option, which has some video content from me, some articles, and some opportunities to engage. And then there'll be some actual online courses as well as live events that will be available through the community. And all of them related to this idea of the thriving versus striving, story, money, rhythm. And then I also have some strategic partners that we do some events together. So one of my partners is certified in Dare to Lead, Brene Brown's content. And so we offer some Brene Brown Dare to Lead courses and masterminds and coaching. And I also have some partners that we deal with some health coaching and some fashion, personal brand, styling kind of stuff. So Nicole Blairware is a partner of mine. Alyssa Bartenbach, who her Instagram I love is Rebel Single Mom. She's doing some cool stuff there. And then Erica Ballard is a health coach that I partner with. So we've collaborated because we have very complementary skills that make for great content and events for people.
I love that. I think that in the Indianapolis community specifically, there is just such a huge community of these women. They're out there doing insanely powerful things for their individual communities, but the ability to just get people together. Health doesn't transcend one specific industry, although you do find a very specific type of person who says, I follow Erica, I love her. She, that type of content is very, very different than what you're going to find with somebody who says, that they're really into makeup or really into beauty. But that doesn't mean the person who wears makeup isn't interested in health.
Right.
And those opportunities to just be able to share those resources, it's phenomenal. I mean, it is absolutely what, obviously the indie social kind of wanted to create a space to allow to happen. And I think a lot of that is happening in social media today, but people are still craving that one-to-one personal connection, right? It's not what you say, it's how you make people feel that people remember. Talk to us a little bit about what you offer from a locality perspective. Obviously, you've got this event that's coming up in March. Is there anything else on the roadmap for you? Is that a goal of yours, is to really land in that community of people and getting them in the same space?
Absolutely. Building community is a tenet of the business in general. And so you'll see everything from one of the events that we're hosting is a one-word tattoo party. So it's a networking event, and one of my dear friends, and she's been on the podcast, is one of the top tattoo artists in the country, actually, and she's local. And so she's going to come in, and we're going to have networking, and she has space for 10 people if they want to get a one-word tattoo that day, that you can get a tattoo that day.
Down for that one.
Everything from the tattoo party to 2-day Dare to Lead events here locally in the community, and everything in between. So we want to mix it up. We want to appeal to the different personalities that we have and make sure that everybody has something. So it's all there.
I love
amazing.
it. Yes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I think most importantly, as we talked about guests to join us, a big component that we've been asked is to provide the sanctuary of events or the space that people can network. And as much as Chas and I would love to do that today, I think what's most important is that it's done correctly and it's done with intention for people from a business focus. You can do these retreats and these that are very personal and maybe they cross over into business. But when we looked at what Indianapolis specifically had as far as resources for these women go, it was a huge missing gap, and it still is. We are in our belief too infant of a brand to really be able to put it on and do it the way that we wanted it done. So we started kind of looking at who's doing it, who's playing in the space, and like we mentioned, you're everywhere. So we have so much admiration for what you're doing because it is singing to our community. I mean, this is something that they absolutely need to be tuning into. So if you've joined us today and you are nodding your head and saying hell yes to the Badass Women's Council podcast, you've got to join us. You've got to tap into this community that you're creating and this opportunity to really be able to connect with other women who are ambitious women. They're on it, right? There's a difference between people who get it and people who don't. And there's just something to be said about the magic that happens when you share a space with a bunch of those women.
The energy in the room is,
It's amazing.
my favorite.
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you guys in the next episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you connect in social. Thanks again.